Risk-based testing is a modern best practice for managing your testing resources. So in this video, I'll show a basic demo of using a GAMP 5 risk assessment for managing your testing in Xray for Jira. What is risk-based testing? It's a strategy for prioritizing your test cases based on the risk of the associated requirements or functionality. In practice, this means you'll complete a risk assessment on each of your requirements or risk hazards, depending on how you want to do it, and you will use the resulting risk ratings to determine the amount of testing you want to complete for each requirement and the order of testing that you will test your requirements. Higher risk requirements will have more testing done sooner. Lower risk requirements will have less testing done later. The first step in implementing risk-based testing is to configure the risk assessment feature into your system. And to do this, you have two options. First, you can implement the feature manually using custom fields and Jira automation, or you could make use of a third-party app from the Atlassian Marketplace. For this demo, I went with the first option and built a GAMP 5 risk assessment using custom fields and automation. Let's look at that first. This is my custom field list filtered on the phrase risk assessment, and we can see I have 5 fields configured which correspond with the 5 fields of the GAMP 5 risk assessment. We have severity, probability, and detectability, which are the input fields, and they are single select list value fields. And we have risk class and risk priority, which are read-only text fields, and these are the calculated fields that will be driven by Jira automation. And each of these fields are associated with the issue type screens where I want the risk assessment feature to be available. In this demo, I'm associating it with risk and requirement issue types. The next step to configuration is to design an automation rule for calculating the risk values. Let's see how that works. First, we have the rule trigger, and for this rule, we want it to run anytime there is a field value change on our 3 risk input fields: risk probability, severity, and detectability. Anytime a user changes one of these 3 values, we want this rule to execute. And when this rule triggers, we will use 2 if-else structures to calculate our 2 risk values, which are risk class and risk priority. Let's look at the first one as an example. So if risk severity is high and probability is high and medium, then we will set a risk class of 1. Else condition, the next else condition checks for risk severity medium, risk probability high. Again, set the risk class to 1, and so forth through all the permutations of risk severity and probability, and setting the risk class value in accordance with our matrix that we saw previously. And then finally, for the else condition in our first if structure, we have a catch-all where we set the risk class to blank, which is a blank space, and this catches any situation where one of the 2 input values is blank, therefore the risk class should not be calculated. And then we repeat this logic with the next if structure, and this it corresponds with the second matrix in our 3-dimensional risk assessment, where we look at risk class and detectability and use it to set a risk priority. And we go through all the different permutations in if-else logic to set the priority based on the class and detectability. And of course, the class was calculated in the if structure above that we just looked at. And now in our project, to see this risk assessment in action, I have a requirement entity selected, and if we look at my list of fields, I have those risk fields that we configured. The severity, probability, and detectability can be selected by the user. Risk class and risk priority are read-only and will be calculated by the system. And if I select values here, and let the automation rule run, we'll see that the risk class just automatically updated based on my severity and probability. And now I can select the detectability, which will then result in the priority being calculated. There, that just updated to high. So in this way, by entering my input values, I can have the system calculate an overall risk value for this requirement. This was just a quick walkthrough of a manual configuration. If you'd like to see a more detailed walkthrough, check out my last video, which is linked in the video description. Okay, so now that we have a risk assessment feature implemented, either through Jira Automation or through a third-party app, we'll go through and we'll apply those risk assessments onto all of our requirements that we want to test. So the next question is, what do we do with these risk values once we've calculated them? So for example, we just calculated a risk priority of high on this functional requirement, and we can use this priority value for three things. Number one, we might base our approvers on the risk priority. Higher priority requirements might have additional approvers added to them. Number two, when we're designing our test coverage here in Xray, we're going to reference this priority value to determine the level of rigor with which this requirement must be tested. As a high priority risk, we're probably going to do more testing on this particular requirement than we would if it had a lower risk rating. So fast forward, and I have added some test coverage to our requirement, and it is now time to route this requirement for approval. And of course, part of what these approvers are going to review is that the assigned test coverage is sufficient given the risk priority. And the last thing we're going to do with our risk ratings is reference them in our coverage reporting for the purposes of planning and monitoring testing. So for example, here is an Xray test coverage report, and I can filter my report based on the risk priority field. And in this way, I can check the coverage in progress on my high risk requirements. I can filter on medium risk requirements, and etc. And we can use this information to schedule our testing and to monitor the progress of our testing based on the risk values. And that's all there is to it. To do risk-based testing in Xray for Jira, all you need to do is first implement a risk assessment feature using either Jira Automation or a third-party marketplace app, and then complete risk assessments, line item risk assessments on your requirements and or your risk hazards, and then use those calculated values for your test management. Use them to identify the rigor of testing or the amount of testing that you want to do for each requirement, and use it for your planning and monitoring to ensure that your highest risk items are tested first. I hope you found this video helpful. If you'd like to see more, go to www.agile-innovations.tech. Thank you for watching.